bum, 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 bum. All right, we're live. Exciting. So today we're actually doing a little bit of a tutorial before we start with the real stuff. All right, so we're starting this stream half an hour early because one of my friends wants to know how to do a specific kind of shader, and so I decided I would show him. I guess it would make more sense if it was Zoom or Discord or whatever, but I'm notoriously bad at that kind of thing, so we're just going to stream it on Twitch because I know how to do that. And there is Alan popping in. He's the guy who wants to know. So the objective today is to get Alan a topological minimap, something that looks like a topological map. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to be in the universal render pipeline. If you've got something that looks like this, you're probably in the universal render pipeline. It's one of the options that you get when you're creating a new project. So here's our camera. We've only got one. And you can see that it's set to some strange setups here. I've turned it to orthographic, and I've given it a very strange set of clipping planes. You're going to want this in orthographic for mini-maps, obviously. Now, what we're looking at is not really a mini-map sort of situation. It's just someone's room, but it's the same basic idea. So switch it over to orthographic, and the reason that matters... Alan says he deleted all that stuff. Well, whatever you can put in. It doesn't have to be... It can be a terrain. It can be balls. Anything that's got a bumpy surface will work. And you're going to want to switch your camera over to orthographic. And the reason for that is because orthographic cameras have a radically different Z depth. So if you're not in orthographic, you're going to have to do different math. Woohoo! Also, reduce the far clip plane down to a fairly low number. Whatever is... far enough for you to get what you need to get. If it's at 10,000, then your Z depth is going to be ridiculous, and you're not going to be very pretty. So once you've got a camera that looks something like this, you're going to have to go into your settings down here in your assets, and over here into Universal RP, and click Depth Texture for every single one of these. Isn't this great? Including... just those three, and then once you've done that, you are almost done. It's actually quite easy from here on out. There's a little bit of... You have to go to battle with Unity to get your settings to work before you're quite ready. Once you're done with that, what we're going to do is we're going to do the most basic way to set up this sort of thing. There are lots of different ways to do this, and we're just going to take the easy route. We're going to go into our main camera. Alan says he doesn't have settings anymore. Did you delete your settings? Okay, well, you're going to want to just start up a new project then and keep that shit. I understand the why you did it, though. It's super annoying, right? So we'll wait for a couple of seconds for Alan to get his scene back in place. And while that's going on, I'll switch it back to Phoenix Wright and open up my other project. Because it takes 15 or 20 minutes to boot anyway, right? Ah, the familiar silver bubble. So we're not going to get to the part where we're actually doing this stuff until we're done showing how to create a topo map, but I guess we can think about it while he's doing his rebooting. So I spent a lot of time working on that fish down there, thinking it was this fish up here. So we don't have any sort of decent setup for our room number 1. So I think what we're going to do for today, while he's setting this stuff up, we're going to just break this up into rooms so that we don't have to load everything all at the same go here. We'll call this top room, and then we'll call this middle room. And then we'll call this lower room. That's not how you spell lower. There we go. And right now, almost everything is in the middle room. All right, so Alan's back in. All right, so you got this scene back. You're going to want to make sure your camera is in ortho with a low far draw range. how low low is. It just can't be 10,000. Anything lower than that. The Relin says that 2020 is better than 2019. That might be true. I have no intention to ever find out. It's possible I'll come back to Unity if they get their act together and Unreal totally loses its shit, but it's a little unlikely. They spent a lot of years getting worse. Once you've got your camera set up, go into your settings elements and make sure you've got depth texture turned on for all three: high, low, and medium quality. And once that's ready, we're going to start with the real jazz. We're going to go up into Materials, and in the Materials folder, right-click and hit Create Shader. Serpent9 says, hey, we're creating shaders, simple shaders. We'll get to the fish in a little bit. You're going to want to create an unlit graph. So once you've created an unlit graph, we'll name it something like Topo Shader. There we have it. And we can open it up in a shader editor and it'll look like this. So let me know when you've gotten there, Al. Or I actually don't know whether you prefer Al or Alan. Let me know. Al is fine. All right, I'll call you Al. So once you're here, you're about 80% done. He's a step behind. That's fine. All you got to do is make sure that when you're creating it, there isn't a depth and everything. That's fine. Once there is a depth and everything, it's just those three values, the high, low, and medium quality. Once you've got those depths set up, you're going to want to create an unlit graph in the Materials folder. Al says, got you, which I don't know whether that means he's here or he's just headed this way. It happens. So once you're there, let me know. I have the unlit graph. Okay, well, when you've got the unlit graph, just hit open in shader editor and you should see this. Got here? All right, so here is where we're going to do a little bit of work. What we've got to do is hit this little button up here. And why isn't... Oh, hit this... Why isn't this letting me change the state? That's interesting. I just tested it and it worked fine. Huh. Give me a second. Why is this... Yeah, see, look. Is it because this one's open? I can't edit a completely different one if that one's open? No? Huh. No, don't maximize it. That's not what I wanted. Move the graph. Yeah, okay. That's fucking weird. So Al is on it. He's telling me what to do. We want to change surface to transparent. Now, the reason for that is because we're using a plane in front of the camera, and we don't want that plane to be the depth that we're thinking about. So if we set it to transparent, it's not going to write to the depth buffer, and we'll get all the juicy depth buffer stuff we want from the scene behind it. That's all we need to do for that. And then all we need is to set ourselves up a color. So create node and then just type in color and choose yourself a color. For now, we'll just go with white. And we're going to need to get depth. So we're going to create node, type in depth, scene depth. There we have it. And then we're going to multiply them together. So that's not how you do it. Create node, multiply. And we're just going to go 1, 2, 3. But here is one of the tricks. Since we're doing an orthographic mode camera, we're going to want to switch to RAW. And that should actually work. So when we hit Save Asset and go back into the scene view, where is our camera here? Here's our camera. We're not quite ready to see it because we haven't put in a plane in front of our camera. So we're just going to spawn in a plane, rotate it 90 degrees so it's facing the camera, move it forward. That's not moving it. Move it forward a little bit. And you can see that we can only see this flat crap. And that is fine, because what we're going to want to do is put the new shader we've created into it. So just to make sure that I'm not getting too far ahead, Alan, are you at this stage? Or Al, whatever. Okay, so if you've got these three nodes piped together into color, we're almost all the way there. The only thing really we have to do to start getting what we want, put this ugly plane in front of the camera. Once you got that ugly plane blocking the camera, we're going to put a material on that ugly plane. So to get the material we want, we'll right-click on our shader and hit Create Material. That'll create a material out of the shader, so we don't have to manually do it. And then the only thing we have to do is drag it onto our plane. So what we've just done is we've created a transparent panel. Did you child? I did, but that doesn't really matter as long as it's blocking the camera. All we're doing is we're putting a transparent plane in front of the camera, and then we're telling that transparent plane to show all of the stuff behind it just as depth. And that's what this looks like. Exciting, right? So once you've got the plane in, you want to right-click on your Topo shader and hit Create Material. And that's going to be the material you put on that plane. All right, so you should see what I'm seeing, and that is something like this. Is this what you're seeing? Nope. All right, well, what are you seeing? A black field or gray field? What have you got? Gray. Okay, so go over to the plane and make sure that down at the bottom you see something like this where it says Shader Graphs Topo Shader. Can you see that? All right, then in your shader, is it set to transparent? Oh, I see what you mean by behind that. Is it set to transparent here? And is this set to raw? Scene depth set to raw. And your camera is set to ortho. So if we set it to perspective, we have to do different math, but it still works out. It's just that the sensitivity is much, much worse. So that's why I generally recommend ortho. Plus, it's a map. It's supposed to be ortho, right? So once it's set to ortho, make sure your far clip plane is set really, really low, however low you can get it. Because the higher it is, the less of a variety there will be in our Z depth. See that? So what this means is that generally you're going to want your orthographic camera at the height of the tallest mountain on your map. As long as you can see stuff, that's fine. So you generally want the orthographic camera set to the height of your tallest mountain, looking down, and you want the far clip plane to be exactly as tall as your tallest mountain, or fudge it a little bit so that there's no clipping. So can you see this now, or is it still gray or strangely colored? Still gray. If you fuss with the various clip planes, do you get different results? Obviously, if your near clip plane goes far enough that it's in front of the thing we created, the transparent object we created, it's going to stop rendering. So here's another thing that we can check. There is a transparent object in this scene already. It is these visors. So the reason why that matters is these safety goggles, if we take them and we point them at the camera so that we can see them quite clearly, the two transparent objects should fight. So you can see that we can see these goggles. Even if our depth buffer setup is screwy, those goggles are still going to be very, very obvious because they are doing something very strange to the depth buffer. They are also transparent. So if we can, if you're having a hard time seeing, whether your system is working, it's possible that can help you determine whether or not it's even rendering properly. My guess is that you got some kind of just one setting is wrong somewhere. If you post some screenshots, I'll know. Oh, make sure that your color is, I guess it doesn't matter whether it's opaque or not because we're not piped into alpha. Yeah, never mind. That was unimportant. So, yeah, you have to hit save. My bad. Up here, this button. Sorry about that. I forgot to say that. Let me know if that fixed shit for you. Okay, so now you can see this gray map, right? He posted the image to Twitter, which is in my other window. There it is. Yeah, so now you're seeing what I see, and that means that we're most of the way to where we're trying to get. The only thing left to do is to make this depth map into something that looks like a topo map, a topological map. So the first step to do that is to change what we do with this depth. Right now, we're just using the depth as a raw value, which means it's between 0 and 1, with 0 being far away and 1 being quite close. You can tell that because if we look at our map, it gets darker the further away from the camera, and it gets brighter the closer to the camera. So 1 would be very close to the camera, and 0 would be very far from the camera. So what we really want to do is run some mathematics on this. So if we come down to math, we have a couple of basic options that we want to try and do. Let's see whether or not we can get a modulo going in here. That's not what we want, though. What we want is to multiply and then round. There are ways to do this. It's called a step. Yeah, so here's a step. If we add in a step, we should be able to get this to be not so linear, not so linear. What do you want to call it? It's a gradient right now. We don't want the gradient. So let's multiply it by however many levels we want. So we just pull in a multiply here, and we'll drop this node into the multiply. And let's go for 10 levels. So now instead of being between 0 and 1, it's between 0 and 10. And now if I'm getting my step right, there's a chance that I will be I will be confusing this. I always remember, I can't ever remember which one of these is, I think I just hooked it up backwards. Yeah. So let's try that again. And don't create the node, just I don't know how to undo it. This is not my my preferred node graph editor. Let's use smooth step. That's better, right? But I don't remember how to do it. We'll try it. No, what am I doing? I'm sorry. I'm trying to do something, and I don't know how this actually works in this version. Once we've got a value between 1 and 10, let's just round the value. Make it real easy on ourselves. We can round or we can floor. Flooring would probably be a little bit better. So let's floor it, which means that we have values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9. And then we can simply either multiply or divide by the same amount. Is there a divide function? There it is. And that'll get us a step. Now, there is a way to do that using smooth step. I just don't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry. So if you want a more condensed version of this, you can use the smooth step node, look up how that works. And then you hit Save Asset. And then we go back into the scene view after that's done recompiling. And you can see that we now have something that's beginning to look a little bit like a topo map. Now, in terms of how it looks in the long run, what we need to do is do things like change the colors we're using. Right now we're using one color. What we actually want to do is loop between several colors. I believe that there is an option to do a curve, but I don't remember it. There's a gradient. So if we use a gradient, there's no input on the gradient. How do we... Okay, I don't know how the gradient works, since there's no input to get the value from it. So I'm not sure how that would function. We'll just lerp between two colors first. So let's go ahead and duplicate this color. And we will simply create two colors. One we will make a kind of a darker brown color, and the other one we will make kind of a lighter tan color. And we will simply do a lerp function. No, that's not how you spell lerp. There we are. And instead of doing a multiply, we'll put this color here, and this color here, and that color, that value there. And we don't need the multiply anymore because we're no longer trying to multiply the color. We're simply moving between two colors. No, that's not. Hold on, gotta save. And if we want more values, we can simply change this. We could actually make this a property, but I don't want to get too far ahead because I'm pretty sure I'm going a mile a minute for someone who's not used to how this happens. So you can see that now we're lerping between two colors. We can easily lerp between 3 or 4 or 5 colors by simply multiplying the values that we're using and changing them to be, lerping, 0 to 0.5 is these two colors, and then these colors. You could also use a curve for that. I just don't know how to do it in this particular shader graph editor. So let's create a basic slider input. So this slider input will allow us to determine how many layers we want in our world. So I don't see a name. Am I not allowed to name it? Is this not a property? Is this a... Well, we'll save it. Go into the scene view. And you can see that by pumping that way up, we now have a very, very different sort of visual. So obviously we would simply want to modify that, but the problem is that I don't think that's actually a property. You have to expose it first. I don't know how to do that. I always use amplify since it's substantially better. It's called an input. You would think that a basic input would be convert to property. There it is. You're right. Okay, there we go. So, are we allowed to name it? Is reference the name? We'll call it layers. We'll save that asset. We'll see. There we are. It's called vector1. Obviously. Rename layers. There we are. So now we have this, and we can slide it up and down to see what we want to see, right? Serpent9 says this is not amplified. No, I'm doing it. I'm doing this for a friend, so I'm not using amplify because he doesn't own it. The last thing we really want to do to get that real topo map feel is to draw black lines between each of these layers. So this is not as hard as it sounds. All we have to do is more math. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come up with a leftover from our flooring here. And the way to do that is to create another math property, basic. No, it's not basic. Where is it? Modulo. So the modulo, the slider isn't working for him. All right, well, I can wait until you're done with the slider. I'm not sure what's wrong with it because I don't really know how I created it, but I had to right-click on it and hit convert to property, if that's something that I went too fast on. And I've connected it both to the multiply and the divide, because the idea here is that we multiply, and then we have a number that's no longer between 0 and 1, and then we divide, and that returns it to being between 0 and 1, but now it's all chunky. This preview is just awful. Let's get rid of it. Let me know if you need more advice on how to get the slider working. I'll try and help you. I'm going to move it to over here. Slider is working, he says. Sounds good. So the other thing that we're doing right now is we're adding in this modulo operator. The modulo operator, unless I've got the name wrong, should be the same as a percentage sign, meaning that it'll give us what's left over. So if we pump this here, we now have a value that is between 0 and 1 again. But what it is it's inside the cracks of those values. So if we had something that went from, if we have a value of 1.1, this is going to be 0.1. The 1's going to go back down, and then we're going to have a fractional value and this value. This value is the bits between the areas that we're trying to draw. And all we really need to do is use a tiny, tiny bit of this value. So what we want to do is we want to remap it. I don't know whether there's a remap function. There is. So we're going to use a remap function here. And we'll drop that in right here. And what we're going to want to do with the remapping is we're going to want to say, well, we don't actually want this to be between 0 and 1. We want the value between 0.95 and 1, and everything else we want to wash away. So to do that, I guess there's probably other ways to do this. I'm just used to using the remap function. To make it nice and crisp, maybe it would be better as an if. Can this do an if statement, greater than statement, comparison statement, and a comparison statement? I don't actually know how to... This Boolean logic might be too difficult for me to do without looking at things up on it. So anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to say that it starts at 0.95 and that ends at 0.96. And that'll give us just a little bit of gray. And then we're going to have it go out into 0 and 1. Now this is actually going to be a massively negative number or a massively positive number because it's not clamped. But what we're basically saying is we would like it to be 0.05 width. And then we're just going to clamp it from 0 to 1. There we have it. We can also do it other ways. There's loads of other ways to do this. So this value here should now be any time when we multiply by, say, 10, anytime we have like a 1.96 or 2.96 or 3.96, it's going to be triggering this. But if it's not, if it's like a 1.3 or a 1.8, it's not. So basically all we're doing is we're coming up with a way to lerp again. So let's copy some of this lerping. Can you select multiple? You can. You just can't shift select. Okay. I'm going to copy and paste these. And this is going to be our lerp today. And we're going to lerp between this color here and a dark color of our choosing, black, for example. Now let's move all of this stuff further back. And hit Save Asset. Now let me make sure that I haven't made a dumb mistake by actually looking. Yeah, here we are. So just to go over the logic here, because I'm sure that he hasn't finished typing yet, we're taking a modulo, but the modulo, this number comes in as between 0 and 1. We multiply it by a number of our choice, meaning that it's between 0 and, say, 56. If that multiplication then ends up with like a 0.96 or a 0.97, a very, very high fractional value, we count that as a threshold line, and we just draw it black instead of whatever color it was supposed to be. That's all we're doing. We're taking that, anything that's a 0.97 or 0.96, and we're drawing it as black. There are other ways to do this math. This is certainly not the only way to do it, but this is the basic approach. So up here, we lerp between these two colors for the body. This is like almost all the values are going to be between these two colors, and it's going to be stepped. So it's going to be like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. And then we override that with a black line if it's close to the edge of what we want. It doesn't have to be black, though. Black actually looked a little bit too severe, so I'm going to lower it down to a brown. Even brown's a little bit too severe. There are other options. For example, we could lerp, if it's too severe for this, we could lerp halfway between them. So to do that, we would simply divide by 2. And now we never lerp all the way to black. We only lerp halfway to black, because lerping is between 0 and 1, and this clamped value is between 0 and 1. We could just clamp it between 0 and 0.5. 0.5, yeah. We'll just clamp it. So since we're clamping it at 0.5, it's never going to get all the way to black. It's only going to ever get halfway to black, which means that our striations are not going to be too bold. In the dark areas, they're going to be darker, and in the lighter areas, they're going to be lighter, and that's going to be a lot better than what we were doing before. Now, to see how this looks in full form, let's go ahead and just create a terrain. And by the way, I'm kind of just fudging around at this point, Al. So if you are confused or have questions, feel free to just spit them out. I just want to make sure I haven't screwed everything up. So we're going to just draw ourselves a nice little terrain. My computer does not like having 2 Unity projects open, I'll tell you that. It's running like a bat out of hell. Alright, so we take this main camera here. Is there a way to make the lines all an even width relative to the camera? Yeah, that's possible. It's got some math in it. And I don't know if I can tell you the math. But if your camera is looking straight down, it's not going to be an issue. It's only going to be an issue if your camera is at an angle like ours currently is. So if we were to switch our rotation to 0, 0, 0, and then move it so that it's pointed in the correct direction. Why is this barfed? Wow, thanks, Unity. What's going on here? Fine. Now, right now, we don't have a good distance set on this, so we're going to want to change our max distances. We'll change our size to 100. We'll change our far distance to 50. And I'm not sure whether or not this is actually working. Where's our panel? Is the plane... Oh, the plane isn't big enough. There we are. So you can see that the reason that we're seeing some inadequate lines here... oh, am I too close? I'm too close. Just pull it up here. That's the top of the mountain over there. And then we can just adjust these far clip planes until we can see everything. There we are. And then we can change the number of lines. Oh, look, we got a spammer. I love spammers. So when we increase the number of layers, we do get this sort of visual. Now we're not getting a real great set of values on it because normally this is actually lerped between several different colors, not just two. Limiting it to just two is pretty bad. So I think what we'll do is, first off, let's just bring the camera down some. And then adjust this so that we can really get as good a version as we can get with this kind of limitation. Oh, that's the size. That's not what I wanted to change. It's the far clip plane I wanted to change. There we go. So we can make the lines have an adjustable width. They won't be adjustable relative to the camera without a lot better math. But if you're in an orthogonal view like we are here, it's not actually going to have there's no close to the camera or far from the camera to worry about. Since we're orthogonal, all things are equal. Now, if we start looking at it from an angle, or if we use a perspective camera, we might have to use some tricks. But the reason that these lines are thicker is because those are shallow slopes that just barely nudge over to the next layer. I don't really know how to make them super even in terms of their scale. The only way I know of how to do that is to actually create it using 3D and then have edge drawing, but then you don't get the rest of these lines. I don't really know what the best option is there. But we do have a couple more things we can do here. So we got that slider, right? Let's go ahead and copy that slider. And then we will call this slider line width. And we'll make that between 0.9 and 0.999. And we will draw that in here. Whatever floats your boat. Now I'm only passing in one argument, so here's the question. Is Unity's shader system smart enough? No, it's not. So unfortunately, we need to pass in two arguments. So what we'll do is we will simply add .001, and then we will combine it into a vector. Is our combine function? Combine. Now this is kind of, I don't think you need to do this. I'm just doing it for testing purposes. All I've done is I've created a vector 2D out of our line width. And that should be something that Unity actually understands. No? Why is it still barfy? Oh. Wait. We copied this. Did it? Fucking hell. Okay, so when we copy it, it like... Right, noted. Sorry, it turns out that I shouldn't have copied it. So we're going to delete this and create a new slider manually. And then we're going to manually pump that in. It might be smart enough after all. And then we're just going to set this up as a property. And then I see the properties system is not what I click on. It's all the properties at once. I get it. I get it. What a shitty way to do it. We're going to call this line width. We're going to go ahead and set this up with a 0.9 to 0.999. Set this up with a 0.95. And let's see whether that works. It might still not work. Oh, it works. So we don't need the rest of that math. The math I was trying to get to do was just pointless. Just delete it. Boom. It's gone. It's gone. Move this here. So now we can set this line width, and this will change how noticeable the lines are on our topo graph. We can also soften these lines rather considerably. There are a lot of ways to make these lines less aggressive, but there is no way to make them universal width, not with this approach. And at least I don't know if there is. If you know of a way to make them universal width, you let me know. The closest thing I can think of is we could use a filter, like just a complete pixel filter. And when there's a color differential, we can draw black. I don't think that's possible in this shader, but I'm no expert. I kind of like how it looks without any lines, to be honest. Now we can customize all of these values, but the thing I want to do is I want to make it go between several colors, not just two. Now, how you would really want to do that is to create a curve that goes between these colors. And this thing does have a curve setting. It's not called a curve. What's it called? A gradient. It does have a gradient. And the gradient does allow you to edit what you want. But the problem is I'm not actually sure how the gradient works. Let's try it out. Let's test it and see whether or not we can get it to work. So if we set this to be a dark brown and then this to be a sprightly green, and then we'll have it white at the tops for the moment. That is a blend curve that allows us to do what? I don't know how this gradient curve works. Give me a second. Unity shader graph gradient. Gradient node defines a gradient. Simple gradient, sample gradient node. Okay, so we have to actually have another node. Sample gradient. There we are. So we'll just pipe a gradient in there. And you can see this time. It's not actually time. It's just this lerp value, obviously. Just drop that in there. Punch it out here. Now our colors, no, not this, sorry. These are now obsolete. So we can delete these colors. There we go. And save that asset. And we're now using this gradient instead. We have to pipe it through this sample gradient line. But once we've done that, we're going to get a different sort of visual. It's very dark. What's going on? Why is there white down there? Oh, is it so dark that the line color is actually... Yeah. So the reason it's so dark is because our mesh is... I mean, our camera has a very challenged range here. So if we change the near clip plane, you can see that we can get it to be quite a bit more pronounced, and we get this white value here. We could have also gotten the same effect by changing the gradient so that it was more white, move everything to the left. So this is more or less as good as I can make it in just a quick little stream. I'm hoping that this made sense to you, Al. Let me know if it didn't, and I'll try and fix it. But, this is the basic setup. Let's go ahead and put it in another color. Let's make this one like a desert. Here we go. And save that. Oh, I didn't save it. Gotta save it. Save that. Boom. So when it comes to just a real quick... What is this? Oh, that's the camera controls. That's not what I want. So when it comes to a real quick setup, this is like, 20 minutes of work, and it's not too shabby. Depending on the kind of map you're using, you'll have different sorts of problems that you're going to want to deal with. In this case, we got some sharp jaggies that I'm not sold on. Whether or not this is good enough is the question. And I think that's not up to me. But hopefully, you now know what shaders are. This is something that is a little bit challenging to understand on a conceptual level. But once you understand that it exists, you can sort of start to work with it however you want. And in this case, we've set up a real simple little shader that allows us to see the Topo map. And we can pan the camera. Oh, that's the wrong axis. We can pan the camera around. And you can see that at some point the mountain gets so tall that we're cutting inside it. Oh no! Al says it's good enough to be getting on with. Yep, there's lots of ways to polish this up. For example, we can have an effect where the edges are actually like serrated glow. You can make it so that it's a holographic effect. You can also change the function to be a little bit more forgiving. Alan says still has to figure out the gradient bit, so I'll just go ahead and take a look here. The lerping factor here, you know how we multiply by a number and then we floor it and then we divide by a number? That value is used as a lerp between 0 and 1. So all we do is we create a gradient that's got all of the values we want, and then we use a sample gradient node with that as the quote-unquote time, and that becomes the color we want. Then I lerp it between that and the line color. So we can like comment this if we want. Can I just hit C to comment? No, of course not. That would be way too simple. I guess we can create sticky notes. So manual stepping. There is a way to do this algorithmically. I just don't happen to remember what the node is called, so we won't do that. And then down here we're going to have to do lines. And then over here we're going to put down a sticky note that's turn step into gradient. There we go. Very basic. The only thing I really want to maybe think about here is these lines. They're a little bit really trivial. What I want to do instead is take values that are across the edge. Because right now we're taking values from point. So Alan says, can I render this into a texture or something and then put the texture on a quad? Sure. So if you want to render to a render texture, you just come down here to output and you select a render texture of your choice, and it'll render to that render texture. You can then make that render texture the albedo of a material, or you could put it into a UI element as a raw image. Either one of those would work just fine. Keep in mind that when you render it to a quad, the quad is going to be flat. This doesn't actually pop the quad up. But if you wanted to pop the quad up, if you wanted to create a secondary terrain, then you can do that. All you have to do is have the shader have a vertical offset that is based on the value on the render texture. And that's right here. See this vertex position? You just pipe it in there. But you aren't going to be able to use a quad for that. You're going to have to use a denser object, something with a lot of points, because that's a per vertex operation. We can talk about that later, if you want to talk about that later. But for right now, what I want to do is I want to go across the edge with a little bit of softness. So we're going to go ahead and do a little bit of work here. So this isn't something you have to copy. I just want to try this for myself. So line width is now an actual width, and what we're going to do is we're going to subtract it from 1, and that will give us the value between 0 and 1 here for this remap. And then what we're going to want to do is do the same basic thing. So if we copy these values and paste them in, except for this time we don't need the subtract, we just need the combine. Oh, fuck you. You can drop this line width in here as the max. And then this remap. And then this clamp. And then we just take a max. Now the remap, oh, that's not what I wanted. Darn it. Just dragged it a little too far there. Now the remap needs to be tweaked a little bit, I think. So this is a remap that goes from 0.98 to 1. This is one that goes from 0 to 0.05. Yeah, so this needs to be inverted. No biggie, just invert it. There you go. We'll save that asset. Go over into the scene here. So what I tried to do is create a line that's got a lot more softness to it. The line width is set to 0.9, which is impossible. There we are. I don't really see the softness coming through very well, though. There's definitely some, but it's not, it's pretty trivial. Yeah, so if I really soften it, I can see the softness, but for the most part, it's still pretty striking. And I think the reason for that is because when I'm remapping it to 1, and I should be remapping it to 0.5. Since when I'm remapping it to 1, I'm actually putting aside more than half of the range for as black as it gets. Yeah, so this is a lot softer now. So with that softness in mind, now when we have a nice thick, when we have a thick line, like say these guys up here, we can sort of see it bleed a little bit. And to me that really says, oh, it's actually a hill. And it's a way to kind of make up for the fact that we can't get our lines to all be one width. There are obviously plenty of other ways to do that, but you know, for taking only a couple of seconds, it's not that hard, not that bad. Let's go ahead and replace the black with ocean. You know, you should just go away. I never use you. So up here we've got this gradient color, and we've got this really dark brown over here. We're going to make that into ocean. There we go. And we'll go ahead and come up with a couple of different ocean colors. And then here between these, we will make a darker brown. I'll hit save. Woo! There we go. So now you can see we've got a little bit of diversity to the way that we draw our map. And this is just how shader work is. It's always a matter of just trying to figure out what you want to show That's the plane. I want to move the camera. What you want to show and how you want to show it. And there can be a lot of tweaking that goes on constantly to get the values that you want to get. One of the other things to keep in mind, Alan says he likes the comic book look of the harsher lines. Sure, you can just go ahead and tweak this forever. All you have to remember is to keep your head about you, because it's very easy to accidentally forget what your values mean and to go off and start doing random stuff. So you want to be aware that your values are manipulated in this way, this very purposeful way that you've created. So if you don't understand how the line width is created, I recommend that you take out a pad of paper and you work it out on the paper until you know exactly what I've done here. Because if you go in trying to tweak this and you end up tweaking it in a way that doesn't make sense, you can just completely damage your shader forever and be like, why didn't this work? I can't remember how it was. And then you're screwed. Ah. That's the way the cookie crumbles. Now, if we actually look at the map we've drawn, it's very smooth, but I'm trying to figure out why we've got... I guess we are looking at quite a big chunk of the map. We're looking at 100. So if we go over here into the plane is actually 100 by 100 by 100. So 50 by 50 by 50 should actually be... Yeah, so if I were to bring this down to 48 by 48 by 48, we would be able to see just a little bit of edge, in theory. No? Oh, there it is. So it's just that it's not... orthogonal is measured across the wide axis, apparently. But these little divots here, I don't like those. Now, when you're actually doing something, you might be wanting to use... When you're moving the camera around, you might want to change the layer count and the clip planes, specifically to try and give you... why is this layers bar backwards? Whatever. To try and give you a good resolution for the range you're at. Anyway, now that that's done, we can save those changes just for kicks and go and work on some fish. Although it took us an hour to do that, so my voice will probably go out pretty soon here. Now, the reason that I know how to do that is because that's how my fog works. So to show you how that looks in Amplify, if we go into the player, there should be a camera. Here it is. So the camera that we've got has a fog quad on top of it. Here it is. This fog quad is the exact same thing that we just created in the other engine. But when I open it up in the shader editor, it looks like this because Amplify is way better. And basically, I'm just doing the same thing, but I'm not doing the stepping in quite the same way. And I'm doing a desaturation trick instead of trying to override the color completely. But you can see that this stuff is not that complicated once you understand what you're doing. It's just a matter of keeping a clear head and knowing what's possible. So let's work on splitting this into rooms. We don't want all of these to be the same room, but the problem is, where do you split? The good news is that our draw range is quite low in this particular game, in this particular section of the game. So I just don't know whether or not we want to split these rocks into two tunnels. I think that might, split them in half. I think that might be best. So if I were to hide this, I should be able to select a big chunk of these rocks. Can I use a box select? I can. There we are. We'll just select these guys. And that one too. And we will move them into our room 1 top room. Like so. So now we can turn the terrain back on. Boop. And now that we have a top room, if we turn that off, boop, you can see that it gets rid of some of that stuff. We're going to want to put everything else in the correct room as well. So here's our top room whale. Here's our top room deep sea light stand. We're going to want to create a top room rocks section, or else we're going to have all of our rocks messing up our conceptual idea. There we go. And from there, we're going to want to move these into their correct place. So here's our middle room rocks. Pow. Not all of these are, well, I guess they are all middle room because I've got a separate tunnel set up. We'll work on that later. We'll assign that later. We do have two other whales. We've got this as the middle room whale, and then we've got our lower room whale. And the reason that I'm breaking it up like this is just so that I don't have to have it all loaded at the same time. I can just unload quite a few of them. So this rope is actually part of the tunnel. So we'll just dump it into the tunnel and figure out what to do with it later. I think this side device is also in the lower tunnel. It's fine. And now that I'm done with the tutorial, my viewer count went way down. More than just Al leaving. Oh well. Maybe I should just run stream tutorials all the time. My problem is that if I'm running a tutorial, I can't actually tell how close people are to wherever I am in the tutorial. It's something where it's very easy to get way, way far ahead of whoever you're trying to help. So, you know, gotta be careful about that. Where are our squids, our eels? There they are. So this is the eels that go here, and we're going to copy that and we're going to paste it into here. Alan says he hasn't left, which means that, strangely enough, everybody else who was watching Alan get a tutorial left. They can go back and watch it, says the Relin. Well, that's true, but I don't know, you know, they can is very different from they will. So we've got a bunch of eels here, and I think that for some reason they were rotated in kind of a funny way on the other eel. We could recreate the eels as well. There's no reason for us to worry about it too much. It was more or less like that. We'll tweak it later. So now that we've got these set up, let's turn off these rooms that we don't need. Save my computer a little bit of grief. Although now it's running fine since I don't have two versions of Unity open. So the only problem I've got with this is that it's actually detracting from the whale. This yellow cable is detracting from the whale. So I think what we're going to want to do is change the material on this cable to something that is basically black. I don't want this to distract from the rest of the setup. So let's see if we've got any basically black stuff. We've got a pitch black cable, which I have a feeling is not as pitch black as I want it to be. No, it's not even close. Because it's pitch black, but it's got a 50-50 setup with a special shader. So let's see if just plain old black. Yeah, just plain old black. That'll do. But if someone does have something they would like a tutorial on, I don't know whether I'll stream a tutorial. This seems like a kind of iffy format. But I can certainly do it as a YouTube video. It's just that there's no way to know what people actually need to know. So this rope should really be inside the deep sea light stand's industrial light mount. which is this guy here. And the reason for that is just because if it's a local value, it's going to be much... Oh, fuck you. God, Unity sucks. It's going to be much easier for us to work out how it's going to work. Well, that's not what I expected to see. Move. So what it's doing is it's trying to recalculate the mesh. But for some reason, it's decided to barf instead. It's probably because I moved this and now its handles are no longer in a place that makes sense. We got the stop way over there, which is correct, but it's underground. So we're just going to move that up. Chances are these handles are also underground. There we go. That's better. Where's the other handle? Oh, it's back here. That's a strange place for it. But these are all put onto a ground that makes no sense, because this ground isn't really supposed to look like this, is it? This is a very, very primitive version of what the ground should be. So let's start to sculpt ourselves some ground. That's going to be, we need to know what we want our ground to look like. So we're coming out of the sky, right? Let's go ahead and put our sky drop here. So we go into top room and add in a cube. And this is going to be the thing that we came down on. And we'll figure out how we want it to look later. Probably have like an oxygen thing at the end of it for emergencies and stuff, but for now all we're going to do is keep it as a cube like this. And then at the bottom of the cube, it's probably a little bit thick. Let's go ahead and shrink it. At the bottom of the cube, we'll put a light because it's that kind of thing. So we'll just come over into our prefabs, level bits. No, it's not lighting stuff. There we are. We've got a couple of different lights. We are going to use this popular point light, or we could use the industrial light mount. Well, we can do whatever we want, really. Put that inside here. Now, the reason I chose the popular light is because it has a bunch of creatures floating around near it, which is kind of why it's called a popular light. The problem with it is I don't believe it actually has any... oh, it's being scaled. That's not going to work, is it? We'll just move it outside. There we are. It doesn't have any visual attached to it aside from that, but for now it's going to be fine. We'll leave it like this for now. And our boy, the player, is going to start at the bottom of that drop point. As always, it's a little bit hard to conceptualize how large something is if you're just kind of doing whatever you please. And it turns out that we have made this, we just put it in the wrong spot, so let's just bring it down. There we go. Well, there it is. The light really is not very bright, is it? It's a popular light, but it's not a very bright one. In this case, we're going to go ahead and punch up the intensity to 2. See if we can get it to actually show up as a light source. See how faint that is? Punch this up to 30, and we'll make it bright friggin' blue. There. Now you can't not see it. That's obviously temporary. We're going to have to figure out exactly how we want that to look in the long run. But if we put a light there, the idea here is that we've dropped near the first creature. So we're going between these pools of darkness, between these pools of light in the darkness. And from a sculpting perspective, I think we're going to want to create walls off to the sides. So let's do that first. We're going to want to turn off orange. Because that's dumb. I don't know why they made it so that when you're editing terrain it should be orange, but it's really, really annoying. So we'll turn it off. And because we're turning it off, it can be easy to forget what we've got selected because there's no orange outline. But it would be nice if we could choose just the orange outline. Don't turn the rest of the object orange, but that's not an option in Unity. So we've locked it so that we won't accidentally click off. And basically, we're just going to create a little bit of a thing here. And our objective here is just to make it tall enough that the player can't swim over the top of it. Because we're going to have a maximum height on this dive, and it's going to be, you know, right there. So it doesn't really matter whether or not this makes sense or looks great or what's beyond it. All we really need is to make sure that the player isn't going to swim past it. That said, we should make it feel really pretty oppressive if you happen to go in, which means that we're going to want to grab ourselves a rock spitter and spit some rocks. Here's our mesh sprayer for the middle room. Might as well have another mesh sprayer for the top room rather than sharing, you know. It's down here at the bottom because that's the way Unity rolls sometimes and not others. So we'll put it at the top. And it's, I think, in the middle of nowhere. We're going to want to drag it up here. We are going to have to turn on the thing we just turned off, the selection outline, because that's the way it happens. Now, I believe that it's currently set to very small rocks. Yeah, well, no. That doesn't seem very small. 30-meter rocks, that's pretty big. We're going to see whether or not this is small rocks. Oh, those aren't small. So let's go ahead and just spit out like a metric crap ton of rocks. Why not, right? Everybody loves rocks. Now, the truth of the matter is the bottom of the ocean is not actually a very rocky place. It is mostly mud. Because water tends to turn rocks into mud. So even though we are putting rocks in here, it's not really how it should be. It should be mud. But we'll work with that later. We might be able to create like mudscapes if we can think of a way to kind of build up mud in a convincing manner. I don't happen to have an image of that in my head, so we're not going to try it for now. But all of these things are nicely partitioned, and we can easily set them up however we want later. It's very easy for us to delete these rocks and try again. We do have some floating rocks here and there. This is all going to need to be massaged. The whole point of the rock spitter is that it sets up a basic idea. It's sort of like like having a coffee stain on a blank page, you know? That's not going to be your final art piece, but it helps to break up the overwhelming blankness of the page. So it's worth keeping in mind that this is a huge expanse. This is not... it looks kind of claustrophobic because these rocks are so big and you don't have any sense of scale. But these rocks are enormous. These are mountains. So to show you how this actually feels, let's just fill in one more gap over here and then we'll press play. So this is how big these rocks are. You can see that these are not subtle rocks. They are truly massive. And anybody who's actually, you know, done deep sea diving or seen any clips of deep sea diving will know right away that this is not how deep seas are supposed to look, since they are basically just like giant flat plains of mud. But I think we're going to need to do something a little bit more severe than giant flat plains of mud, so this is what we're doing. Now let's go ahead and tweak these rocks and massage things until they make some sense. First, we're just going to delete the floating rocks because those are obviously stupid. But I think that was the only one that was really floaty. Now all we need to do is, once again, turn off... God, I wish I could remember which of these buttons is the one I need. Turn that off, lock it, and then we will paint ourselves some raised and lowered terrain. Ooh! And basically, we're just going to break up the muddy flatness with a lot of sculpted elements. This is like a tedious way to do it, but that's fine. It's very meditative. We'll just meditate our way to a happier dead whale. That's what people meditate, right? Oh, look, we do have one more. Well, it's not really a floating rock. It's an outcropping. We'll keep it. Now, this whale is actually kind of bumping into some of these rocks. We might change some of this just to try and make it feel a little bit less like the whale is, you know, bumping into a rock there. We'll deal with that in a minute or two, though. So what I'm doing now is I'm sculpting out the lee, meaning that the sand beneath these rocks is going to be sheltered. So there's going to be sand to build up on one side of the rock, and there's going to be a sand pit, a hole where the sand could have gathered but isn't because of the way that it's being sheltered. We're also going to be drawing in quite a bit of rock here. This isn't the only... It's not all going to be this sand texture by any means. We'll go ahead and just pull that in. Push this up. Block this out. Alright, so that's more or less the right basic shape for our setup. Let's go ahead and give it a little bit of sustenance. So we'll just beef this entire area up a little bit. And kind of drive the player downhill. Like that, more or less. And then we'll switch over to painting textures. When we paint the textures, we're going to want a higher opacity, and we'll start to paint in some rock to try and get this to be a little bit less burdensome. So let's start with this. Just create ourselves a nice little rock outcropping here. And you can see we're using a texture that's very similar. Let's go ahead and unlock this. We're unlocking it because I want to grab this rock and move it. It's just not in a good spot. It's overriding the whale's tail, and that's just not going to work out for me. I'll just grab this guy and move them too. All right, now back to this. I guess we're going to go ahead and just do a little bit more raising and lowering terrain just to fill in this one little spot here. Once again, it's reset my friggin' brush. I really wish they wouldn't do that. There we go. And let's just use a soften brush because I really didn't try very hard there. Now, back to painting textures. Alan says clever. I'm not sure what he's talking about because I haven't been paying attention to chat. Just bring these rock formations in. And basically our goal here is that we either want to mask the edges of the rocks or we want to make it super clear that there's sand at the edges of the rocks. Both of those options are fine. The only problem we have is when we don't do either one of those things and we let them really obviously be meshes. At that point it becomes really unrealistic. Alan says he likes the way I'm doing the sand dunes in the lee areas. Yep, it's an easy way to create the sort of patterns you want, and I just accidentally drew some rock where I wanted sand, but that's fine. It's something we can change, override it as we see fit. So just start to sculpt in some rocks up here now, because this is where the player starts, and we want it to feel fairly unfriendly. So we'll just block that in. Now we're going to switch over to sand drawing. We're going to choose the bright sand. The bright sand is much more visible, so we'll use it as a obvious guide sand. Just put patches here and there to make it feel kind of right, you know? But the bulk of it is going to guide you towards the whale. Now let's switch over to this sand here. And I accidentally overrode this little curl of sand, which I had intended to just be sand. I'll put that back in. We have several different rock textures, so if a rock starts to feel a little bit too iffy, we can always go back and change it to the other rock texture. No biggie. All right, so let's see how this looks. Okay, so the brightness of the light around us is obviously very silly. You can see that we have a problem because our terrain is actually very, very low res. It's a large terrain with a fairly low number of variations to it. So that means that we have to be careful when we have places like this because the terrain, the height map, becomes really obvious. So we're going to come down here to smooth height, and we're just going to try and break down some of these excessively pointy bits. And we can add in some rocks, some small rocks, to sort of make it really feel a lot more natural. I drew these in, and again, I didn't know how large they were going to be because it's really easy to misunderstand scale in a situation like this. So we're just going to bring them down like that. And then we're going to grab that mesh sprayer, and we are going to there we are. And we're going to go ahead and lower the size considerably. So here you can see we've now got a size between 5 and 5, but it dips below 5. So that means we're going to have some fairly small rocks. And that's going to be perfect for breaking up some of our values here. Shrink this mesh sprayer down to give us some accuracy. And then we will move into the area that needs spraying, which is down near the player. Down there! Further down there! Woo! Too small. Alan says that watching me edit this has been useful. So keep in mind that there are a lot of other ways to build large-scale maps. I'm building very small-scale maps. If you are planning to build a world or a city, you're going to want to use some more extensive automation. Things like there are brushes that you can use that just paint mountains and stuff like that. When you're doing this sort of really tight work, you basically have to do it manually because everything the player looks at is going to be, you know, something notable. It's going to be something you put there on purpose. But if you're doing larger objects, you're going to want to use terrain brushes that are huge. Maybe even just use height maps that you download from somewhere, you know? I have used a tool called Gaia. It's pretty good. However, it is not free. So we've got some rocks here and there. We're not quite done with it. Let's keep pulling it. But again, these rocks are inspirations. They're not intended to be the only thing that we do. So Alan says he was definitely looking at some height maps online. Yep, it really just depends on what you need. I always recommend taking the easiest route you can find because games are hard to develop. And everybody is happier when a game actually comes out. Yeah, so if you're adding building assets, then you're probably looking at a fairly small height map. It's possible that you're looking at a very large height map with just a couple of building assets, but that would be unusual. So there are plenty of building assets available, ranging from good to bad and free to expensive. Obviously, it all depends on what you need, just like with all other aspects of game dev. So we're just going to do a little bit more painting of textures here, and that should help us to kind of just cement these new rocks that we added in. All right, let's take a look. Alan says an alien world with small outposts. That sounds cool. There's plenty of small outpost material or assets out there. You'll probably be able to find them. So you can see that we definitely have some terrain height maps skewing over here. We're going to want to soften that up, even though the player probably won't see it. It's good practice to not do things really terribly, you know? Just in general. So if we go over into the back, you can see we've got skewing on this side as well. We'll just increase the brush size and just try and get that to be a little bit less outrageous. The problem is that ends up screwing up some of our fill. So we need to go back in, lower the opacity down, and just punch up the edges that needed to be punched up so that they don't... It's always going to be kind of iffy, you know? It's always a trade-off between stretching the height map too much and not letting it do its job. So if you are finding that the height map is a little bit stretchy, you can always paint it with a different material to try and hide the fact that it's overly stretchy. So if we come over here, we can choose something like this and just give it a little bit of a splash of that, and it'll sort of gently smooth out some of the more aggressively scaled elements by splitting them between several different textures. Alan says a scanner is only going to be a small screen on a console, so it doesn't have to look that high fidelity. More than that, if it's going to be an in-world like tech thing, you can always just say that their tech is kind of shitty. But if you're interested, you can certainly create all sorts of tech bit add-ons for that kind of thing. You could have like scan lines and stuff like that. All you have to do is figure out how to do them. And, you know, you can ask me, but for the most part, that sort of stuff can be looked up. You can find tutorials on all sorts of things online. And it's mostly just a matter of knowing the trick to it. Like in that case, it would be a time times a sine wave, you know, time into a sine wave. So I was noticing that we had some really terrible stuff. The really terrible stuff is terrible because we added rocks, and the rocks are not quite what we need. So we're going to just change things so that the rocks work out in our favor. And I don't think there's any saving this rock here. This is just a bad rock. Let's move it so that it supports the shape that we've built instead of being in the way. There we go. And this rock here is a little bit unnatural. Just tilt it and bring it in. This rock is unnatural. This spike is unnatural, so we're going to just combine the two. Hide the roughness of the height map by putting rocks in the spots where the height map's roughness would show. Which I'm sure you've all seen that meme where they put the trash can in the Z-fighting corner. Same thing, except for without a really stupid Z-fighting corner. You shouldn't have a stupid Z-fighting corner. You should build your maps, your modules, so that they have very, very little Z-fighting, if any. So here we've got this drop. I don't think this drop is going to work for us. It's just a little too deep. It's the primary drop that we see going into the area. And I don't want us to get caught up in it. So we're going to soften it. That's better. Then we'll just do a little bit of texture painting to give it more personality here. All right, let's see how that feels. We're definitely going to need to replace this with something that makes a little more sense. That rock is really aggressive, isn't it? Let's go ahead and move it because it's just right in our field of vision the instant we start, and that's pretty obvious. So this is it, or no, it's just another rock that looks exactly like this one. This particular rock is prone to standing out because it has a pancakey shape, which makes it great for most angles, but since the angle that we choose is random, sometimes we don't get its good side. There's a floating rock. We'll just delete that. Well, this one will do better rotated along the long end. Here are the rocks. This is the pancakey rock in question. We'll just smoosh it into the world. Here's some floaty rocks. I think that's another pancakey rock. Yeah, so there's only like 3.5 rocks, so that's why we get the pancakey rock so much. And since the pancakey rock is the one that stands out if it's at the wrong angle, that's the one we tend to see the most of. Let's just do a little bit of painting to try and clean it up. All right. I've been streaming for a couple hours now. My voice is on its last... Oh, I didn't get the right rocks. Well, I would have had to get those rocks as well. Voice is on its last legs, so don't expect too much more from this stream. If you got questions, now would be a good time to ask them. We will keep doing rocks until my voice gives out. Yeah, it's another pancakey. No, we want it to be on the other side. Joop. Yeah, that's definitely more natural. We got a little bit of a pancake stick out, though. I don't know what rock that is. Oh, there's a rock I didn't even see. When it's not lit, it's not as obvious. No, I don't want that. That'll actually show through. There we are. That's much more natural. Still got a little bit of an edge to it, a little bit of an obvious mesh edge. Partially that's just because the light is so aggressive in this area, so we've got to be a little bit more careful than we otherwise might be. But that said, we should be able to turn on shadows, which might help. Yeah, it helps a little. And as we move forward, oh, that's not such a great... We'll have to add some stuff here. We can see that little moon, a little crescent moon ahead of us. And there's definitely going to have to be more to this approach. Not in terms of it being more complicated, but in terms of just refining it a little bit. Because the point of this first approach is to serve as kind of an establishing shot. So we want to make sure that you understand this area is rocky and sandy. As we come up, we can see this strange thing with a light on it. And what we'll do is we'll have like a pop-in that says, oh, this isn't our tech. This is far too old. Or not old, but, you know, classic. It's not... We don't use this design. It hasn't been used for hundreds of years. Something like that. And then, of course, you got this huge whale. And the idea is that on this whale, you kind of approach from the tail section. And you're kind of thinking, oh, well, this is kind of an impressive whale. And then the idea is to start with all of the creatures feasting on the whale. So my hope here is that you'll get used to the idea of the whale. And then you will suddenly get hit with just like this wall of eels. So let's go ahead and build a wall of eels. So we come down here to the whale. There you are, Mr. Whale. And the eels we've got are very much temporary eels. Let's go ahead and delete all of them except for one. I think we might be deleting all of them except for two, because I think that the eel is actually inside an eel. We don't really want that. Let's go ahead and remove the outer eel. And leave ourselves with just the inner eel. There we go. So here is one of our eels, and it's very small because I descaled everything. So we're going to just scale it right up, and we can put it into a place where it can start to be a sudden wall of eels. It feels skinny. Why isn't it moving? Did I accidentally scale this by... Yeah, I did. Brilliant! Here we are. So to create a wall of eels, we'll just go ahead and sandwich them all in right here. No, don't scale it, just move it. Serpent9 says, baby eel. Well, these eels are longer than you. They're huge. But there are definitely larger and smaller eels. Babies and not so babies. You can see we've got some eels kind of sticking inside of the snake, or inside of the creature. To some extent that's fine, but we don't want to make that like a something that happens so much that the player will notice. It is fat. It's not something that is rigid, and the eel could very well be digging into it. So it's fine, but want to make sure that it's not super annoying to look at, you know? So I think that we need to modify some of these eels so that they are... There we are. We've got too much of a literal wall of eels. We don't want the eels to be quite so obviously sprayed down by me. One of our other options is we can use a mesh sprayer to spray these eels. I don't think that there is a mesh sprayer that is set up to point the eels in the right direction. So I would either have to do that or manually point them all in the right direction, and both of those options sound annoying. So for today we're just going to cut and paste tons of eels. Trying to select specific eels, it is not easy because they select on their unshaded mesh, not on their shaded mesh, which means their animations are actually making it very hard for me to click on them. So now we're just going to copy all the eels. One other thing worth noting is that I am doing this with a local pivot set of operations, which does mean that the eels are moving in a really strange way. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to centered. That way they won't disrupt quite so obviously. We definitely have some eels inside of the creature at this point, so we're going to want to probably have to go through and clean this up, but we'll do that later. For now I want to get a sense of what it's like to face a wall of eels, and whether this is enough to be a wall of eels. One of the things to note is that this light doesn't illuminate the eels. It's not at the right angle. So when you get to the eels, it's your light that illuminates them. That's not necessarily a bad setup, but these eels are not, they don't pop, you know, because they're black. Have to think about it. Anyway, my voice is going, and I'm getting thirsty. So we're going to call this a stop for today. Thank you for keeping me company, those of you who did. And to everybody else, well, maybe you'll keep me company next time. I'm going to try and put something over here, maybe. Exciting stuff. Bye.